This is the Support Podcast with Mike and Ryan. How's it going, Mike?
Hey Ryan, how's it going?
Good,
It's
man.
been a little while, huh?
It has.
Yeah, we had a little bit of a delay from the last podcast when we were discussing Memorial Day and kind of how things have been going with COVID coming out. Had a busy couple of weeks at work, so just finally got around to get some good solid time in on recording and even just getting a chat to even start talking about this kind of stuff. So it's good to see you again. Glad to see you outside of work for a little bit and have a chat with you there.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, today we want to talk a little bit about leadership and discuss kind of, some of the ins and outs on what we do every day. I know you're a tier three technician who, has been moving up the chain here recently and heading into that kind of road. I know you're interested in leadership and ways to even use leadership to help you in your daily job now. I've had a couple of promotions myself and gone through team lead and went through up to manager. So I have some experience in leadership over the last 4 or 5 years, and even in a past lifetime over at Big Lots, I was a manager in the furniture department when I was 18 years old. So I feel like that really helped me formulate my path. Um, but we also have a guest on today, so we want to introduce him since he's awkwardly sitting over there. I'd like to introduce Joe Lombardo. He's a director of support here, and he has over 10 years of leadership experience, including, I believe, 5 years of leadership experience in the military. Welcome, Joe. You want to give us a little intro and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, Mike, thanks. Like I said, my name is Joe Lombardo, the director of support. Yeah, I think leadership is definitely an important topic for myself. As Mike alluded to, I have a history with the military background. I did serve 8 years in the Army, prior to my work here today. So I do have an interest in leadership from a couple of different perspectives. Obviously, from a military background, that's a certain kind of leadership. And then in the corporate world, I was also, like Mike was, in the retail world for a while. So got to experience the retail side of leadership, and then on into the technical side of things as well. So it's definitely evolved and changed, and leadership itself is definitely such a broad topic. But it's of great interest to me, not just in the current role, but throughout my life. So I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
So, what got you interested in leadership? Did you have that from an earlier time in life, or did it something happen in high school? Can you give us a little background on kind of where you started from?
Yeah, I think actually high school is probably where it started, but not. It wasn't something that I was like laser focused on. The group of friends that I was running around with in high school, we were not what you would call model citizens at the time by any stretch of the imagination, but we all had a keen interest in military service after high school. So as we got closer to the end of high school, we started to get more and more involved with things like that. Got into ROTC programs in high school, and that was my first real introduction and meeting real people that I could associate with leadership because the military background is just so symbolic to that. So that was my first real introduction. I met some really outstanding individuals who were recently retired veterans who were teachers at our high school, and that was my first real exposure to that style of leadership outside of the sporting world or anything like that. And that's really where it got started. And I didn't see myself necessarily in a leadership role, although I did, I think I had a small leadership role in high school in the ROTC program, but it didn't really connect with me. It was just sort of that thing you do. And even into my early, after enlisting in the Army, I didn't, you don't just get a leadership role, and it didn't really resonate with me even then. It took several years before I really understood what my connection was to that and where my interests were with that. It was probably a good 3 years in before I really had a keen interest in it and understood for me what it meant, and really started to pursue it.
That I wanted to add something here. For me with leadership, it started as a way, and maybe Joe, you can correlate this or confirm it. I used to think of leadership as a way of like kind of like telling people what to do, right? And maybe part of it is like that, right? There is a skill in being able to get tasks done, But then I saw it more over time once I got more interested in it and I started researching history as a way to, you have to be able to lead yourself before you can really lead others, right? Through like discipline and research and education. But I looked at it more of like as a way to take on additional responsibility. It's not like you're putting the responsibility on other people. You're taking on that responsibility. And did it evolve that same way for you, or did it evolve differently, I guess?
I think it was very similar. The way the hierarchy works in the military culture, it really is very rigid. So they have strict definitions for what leaders are and who's a leader and who's a follower. And so, I really did a lot of growing up. I joined the military when I was 17 years old. So I did a lot of growing up in that environment. And I think that did shape my early impression of what leadership was or was supposed to be. And I agree. I think that it starts off that way. It starts off as you view a leader as a person who tells you what to do. And then as you grow and you come to understand a little bit more about what they're actually trying to do, is they're trying to accomplish something. That's a leader ultimately is trying to accomplish something. And the methods that they use to do that can include influencing people or various other methods, but that's ultimately
Yelling at people.
Fear is one way, and it's powerful, right? But it's not going to be as successful as being motivated, like wanting to do it for that person because you know that they're there for you and you guys are on the same path.
I can tell you actually it's my personal experience with leadership when I was very young was actually that, and the way Joe describes military leadership is what I thought being a leader was, which is super intense. As a 16 or 17-year-old, your thought process is that if you're a leader, you are constantly yelling at people and telling them what they've done wrong. And it, from the movies and from my experience with my families being either in the military or first responders and stuff like that, it was a lot of intensity if you were a leader. And then as I grew up, I started realizing that it's a process, just like everything else, and it is usually if you have other leaders around you that are smart and that are capable, they make it more fluid for you to be able to learn and grow into that position.
Definitely.
I agree. I think there's an aspect to that when we say, the leaders that I've seen or the leaders that I've experienced, and we often forget that there are different skills of leaders and skill levels of leaders, and some leaders are good leaders and some leaders are not so good leaders. And you can have someone who knows about leadership who may not be able to express that or execute on some of those leadership skills and be effective. So I think I saw a lot of that early in my military career. I saw what the stereotypical leader was, the person yelling and trying to rule through or lead through fear. And I saw those that were more influencers and coercers, and I saw those that I've come to realize today were even more effective, and those that started with why and answering the question of why am I trying to do what I'm trying to do? Here's exactly what I'm trying to do. Let me explain your role in this. Let's go do this together. There's actually, I think that the training that I went through in the Army, I think is actually very good for early low-level leaders who are getting entry into the leadership role. I think they do a very good job in those trainings of explaining a lot of these principles and allowing you to practice them, because there's elements to all of them. Even a good leader needs to be able to give a command. So there are times when it's necessary, and you need to learn how to do that effectively. And so, there are different skills that you need to learn and hone and practice to be successful, no matter what style that you do.
Yeah. Do you have any examples? Any say like any activities do you do? Anything that you work on to try to hone your leadership skills?
Oh boy. Yeah, well, I can think of a couple of training exercises that we did, and it's funny when you're in the moment, you don't usually realize that these are training exercises, and for what they're for. But I'll use the command example. Being able to speak in an authoritative voice to be able to be heard in a certain situation, like in the military, you're often training for combat situations or for for situations that are very hectic. And you need to be able to speak clearly and be heard. So that the things and the things that you're saying, the directions you're giving, the information you're passing along is received on the other end. And so practicing that act of being able to speak out clearly and issue commands, we used to practice that in the morning by leading our physical training exercise routines. And that's how you would practice the art of giving a command and then giving the next command and being able to be heard all the way to the back of the formation of people, and then being able to execute that at the right time, and being able to march a formation around it and actually say the commands loud enough with the appropriate inflection so that people can understand it. It's really about communication skills. It's not about yelling at people. And I think that's one of those things that you kind of pick up on after the fact. In the moment, you might be thinking, why are they asking me to do this? Why do I have to lead a PT session today? But it's really to get you to practice doing those things so that you're more comfortable doing them. And then later on in the training, as you go out in a field training exercise and you're acting as a squad leader and you need to give commands to the entire squad of people in the field while mock mortars are going off and blank rounds are being fired out of people's M16s, that you can be heard and that people can understand what you're saying. And so, it's just one small skill of being able to communicate that you can practice through things that you wouldn't really expect.
I never really compared the two, but I guess I'm just going to throw this out there. I was in band growing up, and I was in high school marching band. And I guess at that point I was a leader as well. I was one of the section leaders. And that's exactly what we had to do, because obviously when you're in marching band, you have left face, right face, about face, you have parade rests, and you have different things that you have to call out in a parade, in a marching, in a competition. You might have to do something on the fly and change it. We used a lot of words like decorum, and we talked about doing things as a team and as one group and one organization. And it was a lot of training in the summertime when it was really hot outside and you really couldn't think straight. And they would talk to you and make you do these exercises for 6 and 7 hours at a time. And then at the 8th hour, you would do it for real. And then it was like, why are you doing this when we're so tired? And I just realized now it's probably because you have to be able to do it secondhand without any question, without really even thinking about it. Oh, we need to go over here. You have to do a left face. You have to march on this time, and you have to do this now. And you can't be tired. That's not really in the cards, right?
Right.
So I heard on another podcast a story where they were training for the Navy SEALs, and one of the leaders who was picked for his credentials, he was really good at everything, but he had a very soft voice. And in a military situation, you need to be able to give commands loudly, because if it's an urgent situation where like safety is involved, it's like everybody get down or everybody get behind this wall. I mean, I don't know the commands they would exactly use, but involving safety, right? So he kept getting in trouble because he could not enunciate loud enough to be able to get people to listen to him. So one of the ways that he worked with the situation was he just found the biggest, loudest guy, and he would just give his orders to that guy, and that guy would be like like that. And that's kind of like what you have to do as a leader. You have to be able to adapt to the situation of where your skills are, and
Think outside the box.
yeah, exactly. One thing I wanted to talk to you about was part of, and I touched on this earlier, part of being a leader, right, is you are in charge, right? To a point. I mean, you are in charge. So you have to tell people what to do, right? But you need to be able to do that in such a way where you're not coming off like you have a big ego, right? So how do you address the ego aspect of it? Because I know that is when we touched on bad versus good leaders. Part of being a bad leader is someone who has a huge ego and can't listen to others. So how do you keep your ego in check?
That's a good question. And I can tell you that speaking from experience of someone who has done a poor job of that in the past, it's not easy to do. And I think, again, it comes, a lot of it has to do with how you're trained and how you view leadership itself. I view my role in leadership as an ever evolving one. And so when it comes to ego, I look at it a lot differently today than I did, say, 10 years ago. 10 years ago, I would be much more likely to um, tell someone exactly what I wanted done and how I wanted it done, and when to do it and how to do it, and be very directive like that. I think today I have evolved my leadership style into being a lot less directive, and I think that's a big part of it was specifically the ego. Today I rely heavily on a lot of other people who are, I guess, they have a lot greater expertise in their areas than I do. And you have to recognize that. What are your areas of expertise? What do you know a lot about? Like I know a lot about, my current role, and I know what I do today, but I don't know what Mike knows, and I certainly don't know what you know, Ryan. And so I have to understand what my actual skills are, and not try to take on things that are outside of my skill set. I'm not going to make an assumption that I know something. Ask a lot of questions, be humble in that aspect, and take the advice of those that do know the answer. I think it's a lesson that every leader should learn, and I think some of the best leaders do learn that eventually, hopefully. You have to be a really good listener to be a really good leader. You have to be able to take advice from anyone, especially identifying those people that are the experts in their field, and listen to them and understand what they're saying. Do your best, ask questions, be inquisitive, and then take that information. And that's really where the leader's job comes in. Take that information, bring it together, and apply that to whatever your situation is. So if that information is going to help me make a decision on whether I should or shouldn't take an action, that's good. Now I've made a decision that I think I should take an action. I can still go back to my expert and say, what do you think that action should be? You're the expert. What do you think is the best course of action here? And I know a lot of people, especially early in their leadership careers, will see that as a sign of weakness. Not understanding something or not knowing something. It's not weak to not know the answer. It's not a sign of weakness. It's just understanding where you are. You should always be asking questions and learning, and definitely it shouldn't defer everything and responsibility to others, but you should be able to lean on them for expertise. So I think it's an ever evolving struggle with that, and knowing that ultimately as a leader you may be responsible for something, right? But it doesn't mean you necessarily are capable of executing that one thing on your own.
Exactly.
It doesn't always have to be in your wheelhouse.
Yep.
I've had I'll tell you, experience of mine that I've noticed being pretty new to leadership in the business world is there's a point you get to, especially when you are like in-house grown and you're growing up in this line. You are learning and learning and learning, and you have so much knowledge, and you get promoted because you have the knowledge, you have the information, you have the ability to spread the knowledge and share it, and then you get promoted again, and it's because you have more knowledge. And then at some point something happens and all of a sudden you have no more knowledge. It's all gone. The knowledge that you had, that you think that you had, is all gone, and now you are now in a different spot. And I've experienced that by dealing with like a software. We work in a software industry, and constantly it's evolving. Well, if you get promoted, eventually at some point, some of those technological differences and changes are no longer right in your peripheral. So you have to either stay on top of it, or you lose some of that, and then you gain some other kind of I don't know how to say it, appendages that allow you to learn that aspect of the business without having to actually know the other side of it. And you're still able to work within the confines of what you used to know, but your ego has to be in check because you no longer know that stuff. So now you do have to rely on the people that used to come to you. And that is a big change. That's a big difference. And I believe, Joe, you've probably experienced that because you've also had an ingrown type of leadership in some aspects, right?
Absolutely, and I agree. I think that you're really trading one set of knowledge for another is ultimately what you're doing. And whereas you may have had a lot of technical knowledge as you grow through the ranks and move up and become known as a leader because of your technical acumen. Eventually, you need to start applying the other tenets of leadership and developing those other skills of leadership and understanding the business aspect that goes along with that to become better at that business role. That next role will require a good mix of each. And then as you move, I think, further and further up into higher levels of leadership, it doesn't mean you need to be less technical, but it does mean that you need to add more of the business skill set and really make sure that you develop those areas and develop the areas of leadership. I think is really important as well, to make sure that you can still execute on those pieces in addition to understanding that technical background that you came from.
All right, so I know that we want to talk about some other stuff about tough decisions, and it goes along with ego, and I'd actually like to propose something a little bit different in regards to ego, because I something I'm really interested in knowing on what you think of when you come up into these type of situations. Well, what happens when you have to make these tough decisions? You have to make unpopular decisions that maybe people don't like, and those people have egos. Those people are also they're full of it. They want to know, or they want to show you that they know it. So how do you, one, share and show and I guess propagate these type of unpopular decisions across a big organization or a big department with a bunch of people that are really intelligent, that are really smart, that really have their own egos as well?
Yeah, there's. I wish there were a silver bullet to answer that question, but there are so many different circumstances. I think that, as a rule of thumb, my approach is usually to, again, I start with a lot of listening. I try to understand where things are coming from. Obviously, it depends on the nature of the decision being made and really who's ultimately responsible for that decision. As a leader, you generally have a good idea of what's within your wheelhouse. What am I responsible for? If it's a decision that I have to make because I'm responsible for the outcome, then ultimately, regardless of ego or what have you, it is my responsibility that this task be accomplished or that this goal be met. And so ultimately, whether it succeeds or not is on me. So the decision then does need to fall, on me, and I need to be responsible for that and own that. It doesn't mean I can't ask for opinions, and it doesn't also mean that everyone will agree that the course of action that I select is the best course of action, or that they will agree with it. But I think that people talk a lot about consensus building, and I think that having open dialogue does help. I think that that information gathering in the beginning to understand where these experts stand, what their opinions are on those subjects, and honestly incorporating them into the decision making process usually buys enough of the it gets enough of the buy-in so that when a decision is made, they feel at least a part of that decision. Whether or not you agree with what the ultimate decision was, they felt that they could at least have input into it. Their voice was heard and considered during that decision making process. And you have to be prepared that, again, not everyone is going to like it. That's their prerogative. You can't make everyone like everything, and I think if they did, that'd be a very boring place. Ultimately, but the person who makes a decision, a person who's responsible, has to own that decision. You have to, be at peace that I've made this decision and this is what I'm going to do. It doesn't mean usually that you have to stick with it.
Yeah.
It's okay to make a decision and then evaluate the results and see if that was indeed right. There's a lot of different facets to that, but I think when it comes to the ego, it's the whole idea of my way or the highway. I've never been on board with that. As far as that goes, I think that at least understanding where people come from really is the first step.
Definitely. So, Mike touched on this before. I know junior leaders deal with this a lot, and I'm going to go back to the unpopular decisions part we got written down here. Being able to handle unpopular decisions or crisis situations as a leader, being able to hold your composure, right? So if everybody is freaking out, right, the first thing, think of like kids, right? If kids are freaking out and they see their parents freaking out, then they're going to freak out even more, right? So as a leader, like, what do you recommend, or what can you do when you're in a crisis situation, or you are handling those unpopular decisions where you keep your composure and you're able to keep the troops in line, make sure that everybody is supported and make sure everybody's taken care of, so that way everything can be held together and everything can keep moving? What do you do in that situation, I guess?
It's a really good question. I think again, I lean on my experience, and it's unique. I mean, to me, coming from again from a military leadership background, I think a lot of the lessons that I learned there, like Mike said about his band lessons, it becomes second nature. And what you really want to do is you want to make sure that the things that you need to do in a crisis situation, those actions and steps that you need to take, you want to make them as close to muscle memory as possible. You want to have practiced them. You want them to be second nature so that you're not really thinking so much about that. You're more in a reactionary mode from that standpoint. So that's one way to make sure that your crisis management doesn't go off the rails, because it's, well, I already know that in this situation, X, Y, and Z has to happen because we've practiced that and we know that's what has to happen. I know that in military leadership and crisis situations, myself, I have found that I personally get much more calm during those situations. I actually tell myself it's time to calm down. I need to slow things down, because as things speed up, things get missed. So I force myself to slow them down and be deliberate. I think the best word I can use is be deliberate. Ask the appropriate questions, understand the situation, and then start to take steps forward. That's, basic crisis management, triaging situations, but really keeping your own emotions in check and detaching yourself from the excitement or the thrill, all the adrenaline that comes along with that. It's really tough. It's a natural response, especially in these, you call like a crisis situation or something that's imminent. I know that in our current role, it manifests a little bit differently than obviously in previous roles, but they do happen. They situations will come up where reactions have to happen, and people need help right now, and there's a lot of pulling in different directions. So again, I think to go back to it, slow things down, take a couple of deep breaths, analyze the situation, ask some questions to make sure you understand what's going on, and then make that first step. Take the first step forward. Okay, our first step is going to be this, and then get things marching forward. And as you do that, you make that first step forward, you're now starting to build the momentum to handling the situation. And you can make course corrections as you need to, but you got to take the first step forward. You got to understand what the situation is, take a step forward, and you kind of move from there.
Cool.
So I guess what is your advice to say? I see a lot of new leaders that want to take that first step forward, but they're paralyzed. We talk about this all the time, slow it down and doing these right things, but you're already in that at that point. But I often see where people will not even take the reins all the time in certain aspects because maybe it scares them. Maybe they are just completely paralyzed, and they think that whatever their next step is going to be is absolutely wrong. What do you say to those people to have them make that first step?
So I actually go back to a quote that's probably not even from this person, but I'm going to attribute it to him anyway, because all the quotes you pull off the internet are true, right?
Absolutely.
Exactly, Abraham Lincoln, right? One of the leaders of history that I have always looked back on to study was Theodore Roosevelt. And he was a former president, distinguished military service, and so forth. But one of the things that he said about leadership really resonated with me very early, and it had to do with specifically that, Mike. And it's something to this effect. Don't quote me on this, but something to this effect. Basically, at the moment of decision, the best thing you can do is the right thing. The next best thing is the wrong thing, and the worst thing you can do is nothing.
That's true. Being decisive is important.
Great.
So it's about decisiveness, and obviously there's a lot to unpack in that quote. But what I took away from it was I have to do my best. Whatever my best is something, but doing nothing is unacceptable, right?
Yeah.
So just standing there and doing nothing, or it will not get anything accomplished. We will definitely fail if nothing happens. So we got to figure something out. That's why I said taking that first step. So that's what gave me the I think the inside, the power, the confidence to really make a decision. And a lot of that also has to do with the person and the people that you work for. Making sure that you are comfortable in making a decision and being able to move that forward, and being supported in doing it, whether it's right or wrong. That you're able to move it forward and that you're not going to have negative repercussions for attempting to move it forward.
Mm-hmm. I would agree.
Great. I think I have to say, if you listen for the last 30 minutes, you're pretty much going to be a great leader. That's what I mean. That's pretty much what it comes down to. It sounds like. Thank you very much, Joe. Next week on the podcast, we're going to be talking about something a little bit rough around the edges, I guess we can call it. We're going to talk about some of the Black Lives Matter movement and some of the protests and a little bit of the kind of what we've been seeing in America over the last couple of months, and honestly over the last probably since the start of America. So we're going to talk about that next week, and we're going to have another special guest, and we look forward to speaking with them. Again, thank you very much, Joe. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Sean.
Thanks, guys.
And Ahern, it's a pleasure.
Thanks, guys. Have a good one.
Bye.